Wrapping up our 2024 NFL Scouting Combine coverage, identifying potential impact, role, and developmental players in the NFL Draft for the Washington Commanders. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. And you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you will get news, analysis, one-on-one conversations with me via text messages from events, games, all kinds of good stuff going on there. So go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to text me today. I'm David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, and I'm here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, everydayers, I appreciate your continued support for the show. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. On this episode, we are going to dive into some NFL Scouting Combine participants that we are going to be studying this spring, as well as some news and notes from around the league. And we're going to be starting this conversation with the most impactful players. So as I identify players that participated in the 2024 NFL Scouting Combine that we want to add to our list this spring to try to break down as much as we can and get as many of these players on record as we can, I thought it'd be wise to break them down in three categories: and most impactful players, role players, and developmental players. Of course, all of these guys have the potential to shift up and down that list. I mean, there's guys every year that get drafted in the first round that people think are going to be impact players that actually turn out to be role players or turn out to be developmental players that never actually fully develop. And that's usually where you get into the bust conversation. You got role players that become impactful players, developmental players that even become, impactful players. Perhaps the most widely known developmental player that was drafted in the NFL today that is currently playing as an impact player, Brock Purdy, quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. It doesn't mean that they're all going to be seventh round draft picks. So we're going to give you about 5 names in each of these groups. And of course, we're starting with the most impactful players as we see them today. Obviously, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May, the top 3 quarterbacks on most people's boards, did not work out, didn't throw at the NFL Scouting Combine. So we're going to keep this conversation to those who did work out. And the most impactful quarterback that we saw, the quarterback that has the most potential to be impactful if the Washington Commanders were to select him for their roster, J.J. McCarthy out of the Michigan Wolverines program. Currently has a first-round grade. A lot of people have said that he's put himself in a conversation for top 5 after his performance at the NFL Scouting Combine, not just on the field in the drills, but also in the interviews with teams, with media, with everybody. So a lot of good stuff done there by J.J. McCarthy. So yes, believe the hype a little bit. Kind of reminds me of Anthony Richardson last year. It was around this time last year. Actually, it was probably earlier in February that this kind of started. But Anthony Richardson, at one point was considered a day 2 prospect, probably needed to sit for a year, and very rapidly kind of climbed the boards into the first round, into the top 10, ended up being drafted in the top 10 by the Indianapolis Colts. And, before injury derailed his rookie season, was looking pretty good. So J.J. McCarthy kind of having one of those types of rises. Of course, he was already a back-end day 1, maybe early day 2 guy before the NFL Scouting Combine, was kind of climbing the boards in a lot of people's opinions before then anyway. And then the NFL Scouting Combine has just kind of solidified him as a first-round quarterback. And now, potentially talking top 10, top 5 type of prospect. Had the fastest 3-cone drill of all the quarterbacks that competed, 6.82 seconds. 20-yard shuttle was also the fastest. The 3-cone drill demonstrates speed, agility, change of direction, body control. Outstanding in all of those. The 20-yard shuttle demonstrates lateral quickness and change of direction. So when you're talking about a quarterback that can be dynamic, not just as a passer, but also as a playmaker himself, those are certainly things that you want to see. And a 4.2 second 20-yard shuttle is typically about what you see from an NFL defensive back. So kind of shows you the agility that J.J. McCarthy put on tape there in Indianapolis. Offensive tackle that could be impactful. And of course, we all know about the biggest names, Olu Fashanu, Joe Alt, all those guys. But if we're realistically looking at the Washington Commanders taking a quarterback at number 2, which again, if they stick at number 2, guys, it's going to be a quarterback. So if we're going off of that metric, we're looking probably day 2 and a Darius Mims out of Georgia. Right now he's looked at as a late first round guy. Crazy things can kind of happen. So we'll see how things develop. But if he is there in the beginning parts of day 2, certainly Marius Mims, an offensive tackle out of Georgia, could be a guy that makes an impact for the Washington Commanders immediately. Unfortunately, he pulled up during his 40, had to shut down his workout, so we didn't see everything that we wanted to out of him in Indianapolis. Even more reason to hit the tape, so we will be studying him as well this offseason. Interior offensive lineman Cooper Beebe out of Kansas State, currently sitting around a second-round projection by most mock draft experts. 1.75 second 10-yard split, very solid. 27.5-inch vertical, 9 foot 1 inch broad jump, where anything above 8 feet 9 inches is pretty much good for an offensive lineman. Did really well in his drills also. So Cooper Beebe, someone that we have talked about on the show here before in previous mock drafts and all that stuff, but certainly someone who's added his name to the list of players that we want to dive into this spring on top of, again, all those top names. And let's just be kind of clear there. All your top name guys, you know what I mean? Your Olu Fashanu's, your Joe Alts, those kinds of guys, you know, Jaden Daniels, those are all guys that are on the list, right? These are just scouting combine guys who worked out that we're kind of adding to this list as we build it out for the spring scouting series that we were trying to do here. Edge rusher, Chop Robinson from Penn State. Honestly, admittedly, he was probably on the list anyway, right? He's a very popular player. He's getting some Micah Parsons comparisons, and considering that Dan Quinn, Joe Witt Jr. both coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, very easy to see why people would be interested in a comp like that. He's getting a late first round grade right now. A lot of people think that he's kind of solidified himself in the back end of that first round. So if Washington wants him, it's a scenario where they may need to package some picks, move back up into the first round, or if they do trade out of that number 2 overall pick, maybe gain, 2 first round picks out of that. A team like the Arizona Cardinals, for example, has that kind of capital, or they trade back, land another day 2 pick, and eventually come in, package some of those picks to move back up into the first round. I don't think Chop Robinson's going to make it to day 2. So we're still going to study him, but the prospects of him and then, of course, his pro day could just put himself over the top and put him completely out of reach of the Washington Commanders. Right now, though, I think he's still within grasp of a late trade up into the first round potentially, so we're going to keep him on the list for right now. Linebacker Peyton Wilson is also someone that we've talked about on the show, but I think he's solidified himself as a prospect that we need to definitely do some homework on and look closer at. Very athletic showing at the scouting combine in Indianapolis. Certainly made himself some money. Still looking at a second round grade there, so perhaps a guy that, you can get there in the early 30s or at pick number 40 if you're the Washington Commanders. And, of course, again, as we'll reference a lot during the offseason, if there's a potential trade back that gains him another second-round pick, perhaps you see him go there. I don't think that Peyton Wilson gets out of the top 50, so you do need to spend one of those second-round picks on him if he even makes it to that point. And, again, pro day is still coming up, and, of course, there's a lot of evaluating and reevaluating that needs to happen before things are fixed. But those are your 5 impact players that you see on the board this spring coming up that we will be diving into. Again, insiders, you will get the full tape breakdowns here on the regular show. We cannot show tape on the show, so we will certainly be talking about these prospects. But if you want the full experience, looking at the video with me as well, become an insider again. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, and that will begin this spring after the first wave of free agency is concluded, which starts next week. But again, we're going to wrap up our NFL Scouting Combine coverage. Next up, we're going to talk about players that could become role players for the Washington Commanders, certainly have potential to be impact players, and we're going to talk about developmental players who certainly have the potential to rise up those boards as well. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel wants you to get buckets with your first bet on America's #1 sportsbook site, FanDuel, because right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet that wins. It's $150 if your bet wins. The Boston Celtics out of the Eastern Conference are the current favorites to win the NBA Finals, while the Denver Nuggets are favored to come out of the Western Conference. Both teams are off on Wednesday, but the Los Angeles Clippers are expected to be competitive in the West and are visiting the Houston Rockets, while the Milwaukee Bucks are second place currently in the East and traveling west to face the Golden State Warriors, who are currently 10th place in the Western Conference. Meanwhile, the San Francisco 49ers are favorites to win Super Bowl 59 with a plus 500 line, and the Kansas City Chiefs are favored to come out of the AFC with a plus 650 line to win it all for a third straight season. And the Washington Commanders sit at plus 15,000. So if you bet $100 on the Commanders to win Super Bowl 59 and they do it, you'll win $15,000. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams or your NFL futures, quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot today. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Continuing now with today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day. Every day, make sure you come back tomorrow. We got some interesting news and tidbits we're going to touch on a little bit here. We're going to flesh it out even more on Thursday, so come back for that. Locked On's also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, we've looked at potential immediate impact players in the NFL draft that the Washington Commanders could target coming out of the 2024 NFL Scouting Combine. Now we're going to talk about potential role players who, of course, have the potential to turn into impact players. And I'm going to go deep in the board on the first one. This is a guy that I came out of the NFL Scouting Combine really excited about, really looking forward to watching his tape. And I will be honest with you, I did not know who running back Isaac Gendo out of Louisville was before we arrived to Indianapolis, but I certainly know who he is now, as do a lot of people who watch the proceedings. Currently, he's projected to go in the 6th round, and according to expert mock drafts, but I have a feeling that grade is going to be going up. Gendo ran a 4.33 40, the fastest in the running back group. He also had the top vertical, one of the top broad jumps. He had a sub 7-second 3-cone drill and a very solid 20-yard shuttle. So he showed long speed, agility, change of direction, body control. Oh, by the way, he caught every single pass thrown to him during the Scouting Combine workouts, and he looked very, very comfortable on the field. This is a guy I'm looking really forward to watching tape of him and sharing it with those insiders when that time comes. So Isaac Gendo, if he's not on your list of players to watch for, certainly add him there. And look at what he brings to the field. Brian Robinson Jr. has got that between the tackles, got a little bit of receiving ability as well. Chris Rodriguez Jr., more of a thumper. I still think he's got some receiving ability as well. Isaac Gendo kind of brings that Antonio Gibson mold, kind of, Tony Pollard type of mold to the Washington Commanders if he comes in. I mean, look at all that speed, but also he's 221 pounds. This isn't, exactly a frail guy here that you're talking about out of the backfield. So it's going to be certainly interesting to watch his tape. Wide receiver Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina, also a guy that if the Washington Commanders target on day 2 could become a role player that also has the potential to be an impact player. 6'1", he's got 4.39 long speed, a 40-inch vertical. So he's not going to be the tallest guy on the team. Certainly, maybe if you want like a 6'3", 6'4" guy somewhere out there, certainly would understand that. But Xavier Leggett, I think, made a lot of money for himself in Indianapolis, currently looking at a 2nd-round projection. I don't know if that's too rich for the Washington Commanders to go there. Some Commanders fans want the team to go wide receiver in the 1st round. If they trade back from number 2, go wide receiver there, or take Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 2. Perhaps that's a tip of the cap towards the talent that Marvin Harrison Jr. possesses versus the need for receiver. But either way, I think that Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson certainly can't do it by themselves. So if you were to look at a guy like Xavier Leggett in the 2nd round, certainly wouldn't be disappointed, and that will be studying more on him. Tight end position, we're looking at Jatavion Sanders out of Texas. Again, currently another guy with a 2nd-round grade. The Commanders have 2 2nd-round picks. They can't take everybody, but certainly could take a couple of these guys. 4.69 40, slower than Sam Laporta from last year, but faster than Michael Mayer. Both of those guys made impacts on their team. Michael Mayer ended up injured, couldn't play quite as long, but was making an impact with the Las Vegas Raiders before he succumbed to that injury. So the Washington Commanders clearly need tight end help. Right now, John Bates is their number 1 guy. Cole Turner is their number 2 guy. I'm pretty sure that Cole Turner is working on his blocking skills as we speak. But the Washington Commanders, if you look at this roster evaluation, you got a guy who can block really well, kind of catch well. You got a guy who can catch really well, and pretty suspect in blocking. So you certainly want to go try to get a guy that's a little bit more complete than the guys you have on your roster. Jatavion Sanders, a guy that can come in, probably fight for that starting position right off the top. Whether they would lean on him, that's why I kind of have him as a role player. Might be a starter, but still that tight end position may not be featured as much as it's kind of used in there to sprinkle and accent the offense. But Jatavion Sanders is certainly a guy to watch going through this process. Cornerback Mike Sanderstill out of Michigan, currently with 3rd-round grade. He's one of the guys that I came into this offseason really interested to look at. He's been called the best nickel in the class by ESPN draft analyst Jordan Reed. So someone that you certainly need to know about. 40-inch vertical, 4.47 40. He's a small dude, so he's certainly a nickel. He's not a free safety. He's not an outside corner. He is a true nickel in every sense of the word, but he's a very good one. So certainly if he's there in the 3rd round, could see the Washington Commanders go after him in that sense. Developmental guys that could possess that immediate role-playing ability or turn into impact players themselves. Kyrie Jackson, cornerback out of Oregon. He's at a late third-round grade right now. Ran a 4.5 very solid, very respectful time. Good work in his agility and position drills. 6'3" cornerback from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Certainly familiar with the area. Make sure you check out Bowie TV's coverage. I know they had some conversations with him, so you're going to want to check those out as well. But he's a guy that late third-round guy, maybe that comp pick. You use that on a guy like Kyrie Jackson, get an outside corner, And of course, some of this is going to depend on the future that you see with, Benjamin St. Juste, Quan Martin, Emmanuel Forbes, all those things. But if you can get him in the third round, there, late third round, I mean, he could be a guy that contributes to your team earlier or sooner rather than later. Safety Cole Bishop out of Utah, perhaps one of the biggest winners of the NFL Scouting Combine this year. He's got a second round grade currently, but some people are saying he's locked into that second round. Some people are saying he might even have gotten himself in the back end of the first round conversation. So kind of weird to have him in my developmental role, but it's because he kind of started off later than that. And so we'll see if the workout warrior hype really impacts him or if it's kind of a short-lived burst of energy right now. Did run a 4.45 40, had a top 5 vertical amongst safeties. One evaluator said that he had the best gauntlet of any defensive back. Again, you got to go back and watch the tape, and that's what this exercise is all about, adding names to our tape watching list. Cole Bishop is one of those guys. Can't put him in the other two areas because, again, just kind of learning about him, which means to me you're still in that developmental role, but could be potentially a player that fills a role, but also could be a future impact player for the team. Linebacker Seal Chambers, he's got a late round grade out of Ohio State, 33-inch vertical, had the best 3-cone of all linebackers that did the 3-cone. Not a lot of them, so there is a grain of salt there. Best shuttle as well, certainly showing some athleticism. I think he's a late round guy coming out of the Ohio State Buckeyes program. Certainly a guy that you might want to take a flyer at. We'll be studying him this offseason as well. The final two players that we're adding to our list coming out of the NFL Scouting Combine, and again, these aren't the only guys on the list. They're just the guys that we're adding to the list coming out of the Scouting Combine. Wide receiver Jacob Cowing out of Arizona, which hurts my heart as an Arizona State grad alum, but he's at a 5th round grade currently. The only one receiver ran in the 4.2s. That was not Cowing, but Cowing was one of 8 to run in the 4.3s. His hands look good in the gauntlet. Looks smooth and in control in the drills. He's a small receiver. He's only 5'8", so he's a slot guy. He's going to need to show some return flair in order to stick on a team. But really, when I look at him, guys, I almost think DeAndre Carter replacement. He's a little bit more slender than DeAndre Carter, but I do think a lot of DeAndre Carter is in him. So as a 5th round guy, 6th round guy, maybe certainly wouldn't mind seeing the Commanders take a flyer there. We'll be studying a little bit more of him. Offensive lineman Tanner Bortolini finishes off our list out of Wisconsin. He's at a 4th round projection currently, 4.94 in the 40. Very fast for a big man. 1.69 10-yard split is great. He had the best 3-cone, the best 20-yard shuttle times. Looks strong in drills. He's a potential center or a guard. I was talking to his college offensive coordinator during the Scouting Combine, just kind of giving him blow by blow of what Bortolini was doing there. Easily one of the most impressive offensive linemen, I think, in Indianapolis. So we will certainly be adding him to our tape study series this offseason. And he's going to be one of the first ones I look at because I'm super excited to see what he can do. So that's going to wrap up our 2024 Combine coverage. We had some coverage at the end of last week as the Combine got going. We talked with Logan Paulson for our Monday episode from Indianapolis. So if you missed that, go back and check that out. Yesterday, we did our first post-scouting Combine mock draft, and now we're going down the list of names that we are adding to our scouting list. And again, we're going to get to as many of these as we can. We got a lot of stuff to cover. We got a lot of stuff that's going to go on for this team. So I don't know if we're going to get all of them before the draft, but we will get as many as we can before then. Coming up next, however, we do have some NFL news and notes going around that we need to discuss to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors, and they know that what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're going to burn rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. You're back here to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Commanders. We had our first post-combine mock draft on yesterday's episode. If you missed that, go ahead, check that out. Let me know what you do or don't think. But we're not the only ones putting that out. Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes, Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, they dropped their first mock draft post-scouting combine. And I got some video clips here from their show. If you want to check out the full episode, I certainly recommend that you do. But we're going to start off with their pick at number 2 for the Washington Commanders.
Washington at pick number 2, and Jayden Daniels' lack of a weight is not going to change too much for his forecast. I think he's the pick at 2. I think when you consider what they have done from a coaching staff perspective, I think when you consider the momentum that exists for Jayden Daniels as compared to the other quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy's the red-hot name coming out. I think Washington stays at 2. I think they get their second preferred quarterback, which in this case would be Jayden Daniels. All
right, that was Kyle Krabs' voice that you heard there of Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes. Of course, Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino doing great work over there. They have the Washington Commanders taking Jayden Daniels coming out of the NFL Scouting Combine. And you know, I think that there's a common thread here that a lot of people came away very impressed with Jayden in his interviews, his football IQ, all of those things. And, you know, there are questions about his physical abilities on the field. There's some questions about the way that he plays the game, but I think that there's no such thing as a perfect prospect, right? Caleb Williams has questions about him. Drake May has questions, and even J.J. McCarthy, as much love as he's getting post-combine, it's not because everybody thinks he's suddenly perfect. There are certainly flaws in what you see on video or on tape with him as well. So Jayden Daniels is an interesting prospect, obviously someone that we're going to talk about a lot more. Charles Davis said on the NFL Network coverage that he thinks that Dan Quinn and some of these other, you know, coaches, defensive coaches specifically, kind of fall in love with those playmakers that can wreck a defense, like Lamar Jackson, like Patrick Mahomes. And he says Jayden Daniels is the most like those two in this class, and that's probably where the Washington Commanders are going to go. So certainly a lot of belief that Jayden Daniels is going to be the pick. There's also a report out there. I'm not going to give the source and all that stuff right now because I haven't really had a chance to really get a firm feel on whether or not I believe there's validity to it. But there is a report out there that I guess the Washington Commanders have been turning down picks or trade offers for the number 2 overall pick already, and that people in the league believe that they're sticking in there taking a quarterback at number 2. Now, don't get me wrong, the outcome could be the same. They could be taking a quarterback at number 2, but for the Washington Commanders to be turning down trade offers already, typically right at this point in time, it's okay, thanks for your offer. We'll look at what happens during the offseason, the free agency, yada, yada, and we'll come back and discuss it. It's very rare that draft trades happen this early, not, you know, unlikely or impossible. I think the Bears and Panthers trade last year happened relatively early in the offseason, but typically you see a lot of those draft trades happen on draft weekend. So for a team to just flat out in March say, or even at the end of February, say thanks but no thanks, we're good, would be a little bit unusual at this point. So again, haven't been able to flesh out full authenticity or a vibe on whether or not I really believe. So I'm not going to give the source of it, but you know, if you happen to stumble upon that report, that's kind of what I'm talking about here. So interesting pick for the Washington Commanders there by again Locked On NFL Scouting with the draft dudes. But the mock draft really gets spicy at pick number 3. So I did want to share with you what Kyle and Joe have going down at the 3rd pick in their latest mock draft, post-combine mock draft.
New England Patriots at number 3.
Straight out.
Okay, who wants to come up?
All right. Let's see.
They're not just going to stick and pick McCarthy or Drake May?
Maybe.
Seems like the ideal quarterbacks the Patriots would like to have.
I can tell you there's a team that really wants J.J. McCarthy.
Well, why don't they come get him right now?
I can't because you're in control of that team.
Who are they? Y'all relinquish the general manager rights. Go ahead.
The Minnesota Vikings.
Okay, let's come on up. Quessy, what are you going to give me?
What's the cost to come up to 3? You're
from
Elliott
11?
Yes.
Didn't this trade just happen with the 49ers and Dolphins?
Yeah.
Like literally?
Ooh.
I'll take that.
That's a hard sell. How about just the 3 ones?
No, I want all the change too. I want all the change, my guy.
It's not my picks. Go ahead. Minnesota up. I've heard they're really hot, and it sounds like Kirk may be on the move. I know ESPN posted a story last night or yesterday that he may be the Atlanta Falcons' preferred choice. that there may be some momentum that goes that way. Obviously, there's a domino effect there because Justin Fields has been linked to Atlanta, so that whole domino effect gets really messy. But one of the momentum pieces out of the combine this past weekend, I know I touched on it on Friday, was Kirk potentially to Atlanta with the Vikings really have eyes with Kevin O'Connell for J.J. McCarthy.
So J.J. McCarthy not only goes in the top 5, he goes in the top 3, jumping Drake May, who does go fairly soon after that. But the Minnesota Vikings moving up with the New England Patriots. We actually, in our mock draft, had the Washington Commanders trading back with the Minnesota Vikings. Some people think that's too far, and that's certainly fair. But J.J. McCarthy certainly in the mix, guys. I don't know that I would say he's firmly jumped any of the top 3 quarterbacks, but I do think he is certainly in the mix. Also, before we get out of here, transition and franchise tag deadline was on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and we have the list here from the NFL of players that were franchise tagged and transition tagged. Franchise tagged players: the Baltimore Ravens tagged Justin Madubuike, defensive tackle. I can't talk right now. All of a sudden, one of my prime free agent targets I knew was kind of a pipe dream. Plus, the Commanders are pretty solid defensive tackle anyway. Carolina Panthers tagged Brian Burns, outside linebacker, rip to him. Chicago Bears tagged Jalen Johnson, the cornerback. Cincinnati Bengals tagged T. Higgins, the wide receiver. Wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. tagged by the Indianapolis Colts. Linebacker Josh Allen tagged by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Cornerback L'Jarius Sneed tagged by the Kansas City Chiefs. Safety Antoine Winfield Jr. tagged by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now some of those players are have received permission to seek trades. I know like L'Jarius Sneed has. I think Jalen Johnson also has as well. But most of those guys will remain with the teams that tagged them as they try to work out more long-term deals. Transition players. There's only one player that was transition tagged. That was New England Patriots safety Kyle Duggar. And according to the NFL, transition player is offered the greater of either the average of the top 10 prior year salaries at the player's position, which would be safety, which average is calculated using the same methodology used for non-exclusive franchise players, or 120% of his prior year's salary. Now for Duggar, that would be the first one. So he'll be offered the average of the top 10 prior year salary of the player's position. And they have, let's see here, the NFL teams have until March 13th, on March 13th, rather, ends July 22nd to sign Duggar to a long-term deal, or else he will play on the transition tag. And then the franchise tag is the same deal. July 22nd, 4 p.m. Eastern time is when the NFL teams that franchise tag players have to negotiate long-term deals with them. So that is those are your players. Kam Curl was not franchise tagged. He was not transition tagged by the Washington Commanders. So he is, in theory, a soon-to-be free agent. And he tweeted the deuces sign on Tuesday evening. Could read into that what you will. Players will always say they hate people reading into their social media posts, but then you do something like that. So we will certainly talk about Kam Curl on tomorrow's episode as we get ready to dive fully into free agency. Free agency frenzy is going to be starting up next week, so we are going to continue to dive into that. We'll talk Kam Curl, and we will do our next position group in our offseason position group preview, getting back on that rhythm. All that's coming up next on our next episode of Locked On Commanders. So make sure you kick it back here. Make sure you come back here. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, just throw them in the YouTube comment section or text me directly as a Locked Insider by going to join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every dayers, thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. And until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.